Welcome back to Snowy Owl Knits. Who doesn't love a great pair of socks? This is the project that I have for you today, with a link to a free pattern down below. And these were so quick and easy, so fun. They're knit from the toe up, and this is an Afterthought heel. I knit the entire sock without the heel in it, and then I went in and added it to the sock later. It's a gorgeous heel, and I used the Adria Feel Stella Jacques yarn for the main color. It took a little less than 150-gram ball of this, and I used the Malabrigo Rios as my toe and my heel, and you need anywhere from 30 to 40 yards at the most of this. And so I went ahead and wound 2 smaller balls and went with that. So enough said. This is a great project for a beginner and great project for experienced knitters too, because they are so quick. You can do them 2 at a time using Magic Loop, or you can do them 1 at a time on DPNs. I went ahead and just did 1 at a time on Magic Loop because my wrists were so tired from doing 2 at a time on Magic Loop that I just had to loosen it up a little bit. But they really were very quick and easy. I think you'll enjoy this a whole lot. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Happy knitting, and we will see you next time on Snowy Owl Knits. Okay, to get started with these socks, we're going to be using a version of Judy's Magic cast on, and it makes for a beautifully seamless toe on the sock. I do my version a little bit different than she does, but the result is the same. So we're going to begin with not very much tail, maybe a foot or so, and we're going to hold it in our hands like it is a slingshot. And with our needles facing towards the left, we have a top needle and a bottom needle. And we're holding both needles, you know, like parallel to each other. So we're going to begin with the bottom needle and rest it on top of this bridge and loop it away from our body and pull it back. And that's our first stitch. In each successive stitch, we'll just remember that the bottom needle gets its loop from the index finger, and the top needle gets its stitch from the thumb. And so now that we have one on the bottom, we're going to go ahead and get one for the top. So we pivot towards ourselves, and we pick up that yarn from the inside out. And now we have a stitch on the top and a stitch on the bottom. Now we need one for the bottom needle, so we go up to the index finger and we go from the inside to the out, back down to the thumb, inside and out. Now we have 2 stitches on each needle, and we need 8. We need one on the bottom needle, so we go to the index finger and go from the inside out. And we just repeat this until we have the required number of stitches on each needle. And this will make 6 and 6, 7 and 7 and 8 and 8. So now this top stitch, the last one that we put on, really isn't secured in any way. And so if I turn this over, I want you to notice that my thumb is holding the tail from the yarn, and it's wrapped over the top of the stitch that I've just cast on. Also notice on this side that you can see what looks like purl bumps, and that helps us distinguish between the back side or the inside of a sock and the outside, which will look more like knit stitches. And so holding that tail and bringing out a little extra yarn, I actually got too much tail, I might cut it. I'm going to turn my needles back to the right, and I'm still holding on to that tail down here. I'm going to clip that just a little bit, otherwise it'll drive me crazy. Alright, and now that our needles are facing this way, we're securing that tail with our finger. We pull out the bottom needle, and we begin with our magic loop knitting. Now on this top needle only, the first round, our stitches are not oriented properly. The front leg is actually in the back, and so what we're going to do is knit through the back loop. Just go in through the top, wrap it, and pull it off. This first round always feels really fiddly, and so I just take it pretty slowly. That's 2. In through the back loop, wrap it, and pull it off. In through the back loop it and pull it off. Knitting through the back loop is really no different than knitting through the front. It's just how you look at it. And just a couple more here, 3 more. I guess this is why they call it magic loop. We've got loops on either end, and that just allows us so much flexibility. Okay, now that I've got that on there, I can turn my work and feed my top needle in, pull the bottom one out. Let's just get that yarn in the back. And these stitches on this needle are oriented properly, so we can just go ahead and knit through the front. Let's see, 4 more. And last one. Again, just turning the needles the other way. Feed one in. And pull the bottom one out. On this round, this is where we begin our increases. We started with 8 on each needle, and we are going to work rounds. We're going to work an increase round where we knit into the front and back of the first stitch and the second to last stitch. We'll do that on both needles. And then we'll work 1 round of plain knitting, and then we'll work the increase round again, followed by a plain knit round. We're going to do this until we have 16 stitches on each needle, but we're going to finish with a plain knit round, and then we'll add in our contrast color. So on these increases, it's knitting through the front and the back. If you haven't done it, you begin as if you're knitting, but you don't pull that first, you don't pull the loop off of the needle yet. When I'm working with magic loop or in the round, I like to snug up that stitch a little bit. Leaving that loop on the left needle, we then knit through the back of it. And we now have 2 stitches, and we can pull that last one off. We had 2 stitches where we had 1 before. And then we knit down to the second of the last stitch. Here's our second to the last stitch. So we knit through the front and through the back. And off the needle, knit the last one. Turn your needles around. Feed the top needle back in. And we want to make sure to keep that tail on the inside so we don't end up having to pull it back through. If you're ever confused about which needle you need to be knitting off of, have a look and make sure that you're looking at the knit side, and the needle you need to work is the one that does not have the working yarn attached to it. So you'll pull out that other needle, and again, this is an increase round. And with magic loop, sometimes the tension between the cord and everything else is just pulling everything a little bit. So again, on that first stitch, just give it a little bit of a tug, not enough to strangle it, but just, you know, just a little bit extra. And that will help to keep everything nice and neat. So that first one is knit front and back. Knit to the second of the last stitch. Here's our second to the last stitch, so we knit through the front and the back. And knit the last stitch. And so now we're going to do a plain round of knitting, and then we will do an increase round. And we'll do that until we have 16 stitches on each needle, and we've done our plain knit round. And when we come back, we will be adding in our main color. We will have created the whole toe. It's starting to look like a toe, but it'll take a few rows before you really can see that. So I will see you back when you have your 16 stitches. Okay, I've just finished the toe for the first sock, and it's a nice clean toe. There's no seam whatsoever. I wanted to point out the reason that we did the increases on the first and the second to last stitch And if you look closely, when you do the knit front and back, you end up with a little purl bump in the second position. And so by doing it on the second to last stitch, the increased stitch on the other side of the toe mirrors the increase on the other side. It's very neat and clean. And so now we are ready to add in our main color. But first I want to point out that when you go to make your socks, you want to consider the length of your foot and then how long you want the cuffs to be. The most important part being the length of the foot. Mine was just a little over 8.5, closer to 9. And so I knew that I needed to, once I had my toe on, and then I need to leave 2 inches or so for the heel, okay? So I knew that I needed to knit another 7 inches before I got to that point. I'm going to show you a sample sock that I knit up just to try size-wise. And it began, I'm folding it up so that you don't see the heel yet. I did it just as one tube, and then I went back in and I added the heel. And that's what the heel will look like. Basically, this is the same yarn, but it started with a different color up here. So that's what we're after. We're going to add our next color in, our main color, and we're going to knit up until 2 inches before we want the foot to end, because the heel will make up that additional 2 inches. So you can measure your own foot. If you have an 11-inch foot, then you need to knit until the toe to here is 9 inches. Okay, if that makes sense. Leave 2 inches for the heel, but we're just going to continue knitting. I'm going to make a longer sock, obviously, but this helped me make sure that my gauge was correct for the fit that I wanted, and it worked out great. So here we are with, let me get some of these things out of the way. I finished my second round, or I'm sorry, my round of plain knitting, and now I can just cut off a tail from my contrast yarn, and I'm ready to bring in my main color. And this one is self-striping, various kinds of colors, so it's exciting to knit with. So basically I'm just going to go back to the starting position for magic loop, and I'm going to be careful not to stretch that next stitch too much on this first round. I can tighten it up on the second. And so I'm going to insert my needle as if to knit, leave a little bit of tail on this yarn, and I'm just going to begin knitting with it. And it will feel a little bit loose until you get something for it to hold on to, but just continue knitting and watch these new colors pop in. It's so much fun. That's one good thing about self-striping yarn, is you don't have as many tails to weave in later, and you also, you know, enjoy the color changes as they come along. Keeps things sort of interesting, I think. So I'm going to knit a round or two here so that we can get things tightened up. And there was one other thing I wanted to point out to you too as I was doing this, and that is how to avoid getting accidental yarn overs that cause you to have extra stitches on your needle. So when I turn my work around, I want to make sure that this working yarn coming from the ball is not on the outside of the needle, because what will happen is when you knit into this, you'll end up with an extra stitch kind of draped over your other needle. You want it to come in between the cord and the needle. So I'm going to pull this out, get my other needle in position. And continue knitting. Get a little extra tension there. I'm still snugging these up as I go so that my edge doesn't have holes in it. You can see that this is a good solid edge so far. And again, don't strangle the stitches, just a little extra tug to make sure that it's snug. And it's just straight knitting until you have the entire length that you want, which makes this go so quickly. So I'm coming up to where I have the yarn joined in, and I'm going to work at snugging it up before I get around again. So that last stitch there would be loose because it's not anchored to anything. So when I turn this, I'm actually going to kind of find those tails and make sure that they are towards the inside of the sock. I don't want to get them confused with the outside. And I can give just a little tug here and pull this needle out. Keep that in the right place. Once I get this fed up onto the needle and have this one in position, I can kind of hold, make it a little extra yarn there. I can kind of hold those tails down with my thumb, and that allows me to make sure that they don't pull from this next stitch. I'm still going to just snug it up a little bit. Once you've gotten a few stitches in, you don't have to worry about those tails anymore, and you can, in fact, if you're like me and you don't like all these things running around, kind of loop it up and tuck it into the toe, and then they're just kind of out of your way until you're finished with the socks and you go to weave those ends in. You don't want to do it at this point because later on in this sock you are going to decide which is the top of the sock and which is the bottom of the sock. And with this yarn, it'll probably just be a measure of which side you prefer. But whenever we weave yarn into a sock at the end, we want to make sure that it's not on the bottom side, you know, the side that you would walk on, just to make sure there's no added bulk that could cause any discomfort. So there you go. It's just knit, knit, knit in the round until 2 inches before you want a heel to be. And when we come back, we'll be at that length, and I will show you how to put in a contrast yarn to hold the place for the heel, which we will do after the completion of the sock. Okay, so I have just met the 7-inch mark, which I was aiming for, where it's time to place the heel. Remember, the heel will add about another 2 inches, and I want the 9 inches. So at this point, it's really a matter of judgment. I have looked at both sides of the sock, and I found this side to be a little bit more pleasing because I think some of the color was just a little more neatly distributed, but really it's a judgment call, and it doesn't matter which side you want to put it on. I ended with some dark yarn here on the needle on this side, and rather than add more length, I'm going to go ahead and work with this because it's a little more difficult picking up some stitches later on when we go to take out this contrast piece that we're putting in. But I didn't want to get the length too much, and so I'm just going to deal with those few stitches that are in a darker color. And again, that's just preference. So to place this, all we're going to do is use a contrast color, which in this case is what we used for the toe. We just want it to be able to show up. But rather than just knitting it onto this needle, I'm going to knit it onto this double-pointed needle, which is in the size 6, just like the needles. And the reason for that is because if I knit that color onto this needle, my needle would then be pointing the other way. So it doesn't make sense, because then we have to go and incorporate this with it. We won't be able to turn our needles to get the position, if that makes sense. I hope it does. You'll see what I mean. So I'm going to leave my main color yarn attached. I'm not going to cut that at all. And I'm going to leave enough tail that it won't pull out later. So, maybe 6 inches or so. And I am just simply going to knit that off of my main needle here. Let me get a good grip on that. And just knit this color, this contrast color, into it. And we're doing that all the way across. Actually, I'm going to pull this out of the way a little bit. It's bumping into me. It shows up very well against all of these colors. It'll be easy to find later. You'll know which, where your heel is going to go. And later when you finish the tube and you come back, you'll be surprised at just how wonderfully this heel works. I found the colors in this sock to be just so much fun. Just gorgeous colors. Love the striping. Okay, so one more here. And of course I forgot my scissors. Let me grab those really quickly. And we're just going to snip another 6 inches off or so. So all we need to do now in order to continue is slip these stitches back onto the main needle. Let me scoot them down a little bit more to this end. I find it easier to go in the back, and don't worry if you're stretching it out a little bit when you do this, because you can tighten it up. Just sliding them over. This really just saves you, I guess, one step. You could have knit onto the main needle and then slipped them onto a DPN and then reversed it. I just find it to be a little bit of a time saver to use this double pointed needle for that purpose. And so we're just sliding them back over. So basically what this does, it allows the stitches in the main color to remain live as you continue working them. And when you take out this contrast yarn later to put in your heel, then you have very little interruption of those main color stitches. Everything is still live and ready to be worked. And so I like to just leave these hang out, and it's now time to work this next row. You can see my yarn is coming from this back needle, and so it's that time where we just continue on as if nothing happened. And don't worry if that first stitch just seems to be a little bit loose. You have the opportunity as you go around on the next circle to take care of that. And so from this point on, we are just knitting as we were before until we have reached our total length. Just simple knitting, and we just don't worry about that heel at all until we have bound off at the cuff. The stitches above will be easier to see when I go to put them back on needles. And so there we have, in the white, this contrast color, the place where our heel will go later. And just continue working until you have reached your desired length. And probably consider doing a 1x1 ribbing or a 2x2 ribbing for an inch or so, whatever your preference is. And I guess I'll come back and we'll do that one little portion together if you wish, or you can skip ahead to the section on putting in the sock. So that's all there is to it. Very easy process. Okay, so I have worked up from the toe, and I've put in this contrast yarn for the placement of the heel, and then I worked about another 6.5 inches. The last inch or so I did with 1x1 rib. I will mention that with ribbing, it's quite, it looks quite spread out using the bigger needles. So I went from a size 6 to a size 3 just to get a little tighter ribbing. It's still very stretchy, but I just wanted it to be neater looking. So now I just want to show quickly the bind off that I think works best for this. It's Jenny's surprisingly stretchy bind off, and I'm doing just a little bit of a modified version of it because the stretchy bind off itself tends to kind of flare out, and so I do just a little something different in order to keep it from flaring as much. So basically I've got knit, purl, knit, purl. We're going to be binding off in pattern, which means that I'll knit each knit and purl each purl. So the first stitch I don't do anything special with, and on each succeeding purl stitch I don't do anything different. So I knit the first stitch, purl the next one, and then slip that first stitch over the purl stitch. So from here on out, before each knit stitch, I am going to do a backwards yarn over, knit into the next knit stitch, and then I'm going to pass both that yarn over and the first stitch over the last one on the needle. That yarn over adds just a little bit of stretch. So the next is a purl. I just go ahead and purl that stitch and slip this stitch over. I don't know what there we go. I caught it too quick. So then we do the reverse yarn over, knit, and pass both stitches over. We've got a purl stitch, and so we don't do anything different. Just go ahead and bind off as normal. We have a knit stitch coming up, so I've got my backwards yarn over. Make sure that yarn stays in back there. Knit and pull both stitches over that first one. And purl and pass one over. Backwards yarn over, knit, and pass both over. Purl, pass one over, backwards yarn over, knit, pass both over, hopefully without splitting yarn like I tend to be doing right here. And purl, pass one over, backwards yarn over and knit, pass two over, purl, pass that one over, backwards yarn over, knit, pass two over, and purl the last stitch. And pass that over. Now this last stitch on the needle can't be by itself, so I'm going to put it over here on the next needle that I'm working, and when I pull this through, that stitch now becomes a part of the needle that I need to work. It's already been worked, but if we leave it on the other needle, it's going to be all by itself, and you'll have a loop at the end that you don't know what to do with. So we've just turned our needles. Let me get everything around here. And since this stitch has already been worked, we just put it back on the needle. It's just now in the right location. We have a knit stitch coming up, so we do the backwards yarn over, knit, and pass these 2 stitches over the first. Okay, so now we're at the point we've finished the entire tube of the sock from the toe up to the cuff, and we've left this place for a heel, and it's marked by this contrasting color. And so for demonstration purposes, since this yarn will be harder for you to see me picking up, I thought I'd use this little semi sock. It's a tube like our sock, and it's got the contrast yarn to show you what it is that we will be doing. So I want you to notice first, it's especially easy to see in this contrast color, how we have a series of V's. And those are the actual, that's an entire stitch, okay? So if we were to like lay 2 needles out like this, you'll notice that we have a left leg and a right leg to each stitch, and then right above each stitch and below each stitch in black is another V. And so what we'll be doing is picking up stitches above and below this contrast color. And we will be picking up, if you look at one individual V, like this, in the white we'll be picking up just the right leg of each stitch going across. So I like to begin by finding that first V, and it's actually easier for me to do this by holding my finger inside of the sock so I can feel the yarn. So here's our first V, and here is another one below it. I'm picking up that first stitch, and I'm skipping over the left leg of it, and then I pick up the next V like this, and I skip over the left leg. Here's the right leg, I'm picking that up, skipping over the left, going into the right, skipping over the left and going into the right. I skip over the left and go into the right. And I do this all the way across the row. This yarn is actually pretty bulky, and it's a little difficult to work with, so that's why I picked up these smaller needles, just so I can show you what it is that we're doing. And so here we are at our last stitch, so I just leave that in place, and then I work the same right leg on the stitch in white above the black contrast. So this V is a little stretched out, but here's the right leg and the left leg. I'm just repeating that process all the way across, just like I did on the bottom. This is totally worth it when you see what a beautiful heel this makes. Instead of all the wraps and turns and the counting that goes on in some other heel methods, I have found this one just to be really satisfying. Okay, picking them up. I have 2 more. You have to make sure to get that one on the edge. It looks like you should be done, but you're not. And let's see if I can get that through there. So let's see, we've got 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 stitches picked up. That's how many I cast on. And then you take a tapestry needle and you just begin pulling out that contrast yarn. And it's quite possible that, you know, in some places it got hung up. Don't worry about it, just kind of work on it. And I'm just working from right to left and pulling that yarn through. When it gets more difficult to pull through, it's perfectly fine just to snip that yarn. See if I can pick up my needle. And just keep pulling it out. Very sticky yarn. Just take it a little bit at a time. Looks like it might be a little split right there. I like to cut it frequently, especially if it is something like this thicker yarn, which I really wouldn't use for socks, but this could have other applications for you too. I think if you were making a stuffed animal and wanted to attach, you know, something to an arm, this would be useful. Let's go ahead and cut again. Just keep pulling out yarn. Without grabbing the main color, the white. Almost there. And last little bit. I do have a little bit of that yarn caught up there. I'm just going to snip that little bit. So there you can see we have a perfect opening. I've got my tail tucked down in there, which is where we're going to build the heel. We'll be picking up, we'll be adding our contrast color in on each side, and we'll pick up a stitch here in the middle where there could possibly be a hole later on. And so I'm going to repeat that process on this sock just as I did with this. You won't be able to see these stitches as well, and so I'll do that and meet you back here, and we'll actually start building the heel. Okay, I now have my stitches on my needle, and I've removed the contrast yarn, and notice my needles are pointing the same way. We're working this magic loop just like we have before. I've got my contrast color ready to go, but before I go ahead and start stitching, I want to pick up and put on each needle a strand of yarn, and what I'm looking for is more of a vertical strand. And what I like to do is kind of pick it up and see if it leaves a hole, and that appears that it doesn't. So I'm going to go ahead and put that on this needle, and I'll worry about the orientation of it in a minute. It looks fine. And then over here I want to pick up another one. Let's see if I like this or not. Yeah, I think that will be good. And I'm going to place that on the other needle, and we'll decrease that stitch when we come back around. So I feel like that's going to make that. Actually might not like that one as much. See here, there's a bit of a hole that possibly could get closed up. I'm not sure. Let me put that one back down and just have another look at what we have available here. Let me try this. Whoops. Try the other leg of it. Perhaps this one will work. I apologize if it's not that clear. Let's see. I think that's better. Okay, so we're going to pull out our back needle and get our contrast color ready. And on the first round, we're just simply getting this contrast color in place. And I want to leave enough tail here that I can work with later for weaving in. And we can tighten this up on our next round. But our job is just to, you know, get that contrast color in place. So we started out with 16 stitches on each needle, and by picking up a stitch on each side, we'll have 18. So we'll just need one extra decrease. See, that one I didn't mount properly. There we go. Just keep working. If you find that you have mounted a stitch in the opposite direction, it's perfectly fine. Just knit it through the back loop and it reorients it. I think it can happen sometimes to everybody. And we're reaching the other side, and we're gonna want to have a look there too to see what we can pick up. I think holes at joins in socks are so common. I hear people talk about that quite a bit. But we do our best to close them up. Okay, let's have a look here and see what we might want to pick up. Let's try this and see what we think. I think that would be okay. There we go. I'm just going to take my time to make sure I don't split anything. Okay, and get work turned around. When I was pulling out my contrast yarn, I got over anxious and pulled too hard on the thread, and part of the purl bump on the back frayed a little bit, but that's not going to show. So again, I'm going to want to pick up one more stitch here to kind of close the gap. Let's see what I think of that. Yeah, I think that will work just fine. Okay, let's just continue around. Get an extra length of yarn here. And I do want to start, you know, snugging up these junctures there on the first and second stitch. We want the socks to be just as neat as we can get them. Oops, I did split that one a little bit. There we go. There's that poor stitch that I just decimated. Sometimes I get in a hurry and that's what happens. There's nothing wrong with taking just a little bit of time for certain things. But it is nice to get into a rhythm and be able to work more quickly. This heels construction is kind of it's like the toe, only we are decreasing on each round rather than increasing to build the toe. It ends up being almost the same size exactly as the toe. I keep wanting to split this. I'm going to try going through the back loop or just remounting this whole stitch. Okay, we're getting down here to the end. And here's the last one for this round. Okay, back to the starting position. And I'm going to get the tail on the inside of the work. but I still want it where I can be able to tighten anything up that I need to. So on each round of the sock, we are going to knit the first and last stitch, but the second stitch, the second and third stitch, are what I am going to use for the decrease. Look at, I've split this too. I'm just doing a terrible job right now. Okay, let me get a little more tension. Okay, so we'll knit the first stitch. Snug everything up. We knit together the second and third. And we knit to the last 3 stitches. I'm going to hold those last 3 stitches in my hand so I don't knit past them. So here are our last 3 stitches. We knit 2 together. And knit the last stitch. Turn the work. I didn't want that to wrap around. Forgive me for this. I had a phone call not too long ago that has me preoccupied. Everything's fine, but anyway, we're repeating that same process on this next round. Let's get a little extra yarn here. We knit the first stitch, snugging it up, and we knit the next 2 together. And knit to the last 3. Here are the last 3. I knit 2 together. And knit the last one. And then I will do 1 round with no decreases. And we'll continue in this fashion until we have 8 stitches left on each needle. So work on decreasing every other round and make sure the first and last stitch are knit, and the 2 that are either before or after are the ones that are knit together. So I will see you back when I have 8 stitches on each needle, and then we'll do a join to finish up. Okay, I am coming up to, I'm finishing my last plain round of knitting, and I am down to 8 stitches on each needle. And it is time to finish off the beautiful sock. So now that I've gotten to this point, I want to cut a length of tail, 6 to 8 inches long, and thread it onto a tapestry needle. Okay, so I've threaded my tapestry needle after my camera cut out there, and what I'm going to do is just kind of lay that there, and we're going to do the Kitchener stitch in order to close up this heel. But we're going to do it in such a way that we don't have those boxy little ears on the end. So normally when you do the Kitchener stitch, you have your stitches all lined up on the needle like this, and each stitch is worked 2 times before it's pulled off. However, for something like a toe or a heel, we don't want those little boxy ears at the end. So rather than preparing the first stitch and the second and then going to the back, we're simply going to begin with our yarn in the back, and with the yarn coming underneath both needles, we're going into the front needle like we were knitting, and we're going to pull it off. So we didn't prepare it first, we just pull it off and kind of snug that up. Now we do prepare the second stitch on the front needle, so it's knit off and then purl on, and on the back stitch, we're going back underneath, we purl that stitch off, and we go right into the second stitch like we're knitting, and we leave it on. Just kind of pull the yarn up under there and kind of snug it up. So then we go back to our first stitch coming under the needle, we knit it off, and purl the next stitch and leave it on. We purl on the back needle, purl off, and knit and leave it on. Coming back to the front, we knit off, and purl and leave it on. Back needle, purl off, let me get that slit off, tighten it up, and knit on. And we knit off on the front needle, and prepare the next stitch by purling and leaving it on. Go to the back needle and purl off and knit on. Back to the front, we knit off, snug that up, and purl, leave it on. Going to the back needle, we purl off and knit, leave it on. Coming back to the front stitch, we knit off, snug it up, and purl, leave it on. Back stitch, we purl off, and knit and leave it on. Coming down to the last couple of stitches here. So we knit off, and purl, leave it on. Forgot to take it off. Purl, leave it on. Back to the back needle, we purl off, and knit. So now these last two stitches have been prepared, so we just go ahead and pull the needles out and kind of snug everything up like so. And then you want to reach into the sock and look at your edge here. You can see where it has come out here, and so we want to go down into the sock between those two stitches. I'm going to try to grab that without poking anything else. So let me show you this before we turn the sock inside out. The heel is nicely rounded. It looks as if it's just been knit into the sock. And so all we have to do is, remember, this is the bottom side of the foot. So we don't want to add any extra stitches like weaving in on the bottom. We want to do it on this side. So I'll turn the sock inside out. And I know that this is the side that I want to do my weaving in. So again, it's sort of like going through smiles and frowns, like a duplicate stitch. Move back through here. And we'll go up through a smile and another smile. We'll go through a frown and then back through that same smile we came out of. And let's see, we'll go up through a smile and the frown next to it. And back down through that smile that we initially went through. And maybe one more time in the same manner. And back through. Cut it, leaving a little bit of length. We do have some other ends to weave in, but I wanted to show you just how pretty the heel of this sock is. We'll get it kind of laid out flat. We used to have a tube, and now we have an actual sock. Isn't it pretty? A little bit of blocking and I think I'm going to have this in shape. So I'm just going to weave in my ends, and I've been trying it on my foot all along, but I'm very pleased with this nice squishy heel. We don't have holes. We have good color, good shape, nice sock. I hope you've enjoyed this. It's just time to go do the same exact thing on the other sock, unless you've been doing 2 at a time. And some people do like to do 2 at a time. It's just too hard on my wrists. So just to cap up, I want to say I did, up until I put in my heel marker, I did 37 rows to get the length that I needed. I needed 9 inches. So I did 37 rows here, and then I did 35 rows from the heel marker up to this point, and I really wanted to end on this orange. So 35 and then another, I think 6 or so. And my only complaint was that the color change in this yarn left 1 pink loop on my cuff. But that's not going to bother me at all. You know, this was a lot of fun, and I hope that you enjoy this as well. We'll see you next time on Snowy Owl Knits.